Evidence secured at marker 4. Advise command we are holding the scene.
Copy that. It's getting heavier out here.
He held a devastating secret. Every detail about this phantom exposes a brutal, calculated decision. Notice the gun holstered at his waist. He secured those gloves long before leaving his staging ground, never just sliding them on mid-panic. He fitted that mask beforehand, never yanking it up late as an afterthought. Look at the stuffed backpack. You never bring a fully packed bag just to take items out. He loaded it before turning his ignition, meaning he knew exactly what he required long before breaching the home. Every object on his frame exposes a choice made hours earlier in his hidden planning room. You see the ultimate picture of a prepared man. Then the plan shatters. He spots the doorbell camera guarding Nancy Guthrie's home, and he slams his gloved hand over the lens. The block fails totally. That lens sits too small. He attacks wrong, breaking the seal. So he shuffles sideways toward a planter and plunges his hand inside. He literally shoves a bush over a security camera. We see a suspect packing a gun, a mask, double gloves, and a full abduction bag. Now he improvises with shrubbery right on his target's front stoop. Watch that exact moment, the blocking hand, the plant, the raw hesitation of a predator winging it, and realize this means far more than awkward footage. That stumble exposes a massive flaw. It reveals one highly specific blind spot in his intel. What did he miss? Jim Clemente caught the error. He operates as a retired FBI supervisory special agent who spent decades hunting abductors.
Be in, especially a home like this, set back from the road and having a good perimeter around it. So that means that to invade that privacy and security, that's the highest risk for an offender. So this is a very high-risk crime on a low-risk victim, which means that the motivation must have been greater than the risk that was taken by this offender. And so motivations are typically money. If that's the case, then it's a kidnapping. If they ask for a ransom, then that would qualify as a kidnapping. Otherwise, it would be an abduction. And other motives could be revenge, some kind of personal ideology, or for sex crimes. And yes, even in cases of a victim of this age, there are people who commit sex crimes. So we don't know what the motive is, but we do know that it was very, very high in motivation because they overcame such a high risk. The next thing is the fact that they removed her from the home. And typically that only happens when the offender has some known connection to that home or to the victim or both. And that could be because he or they worked at the home, doing some repairs, caring for the garden, the pool, whatever it is. But some connection that would give them the information that she lived there alone and that she was vulnerable.
Who captured this critical data? The FBI Video Forensic Analysis Unit, the same squad that cracked the Brian Kohberger case, executed a dimensional reconstruction. They pulled the true physical dimensions of Nancy Guthrie's front door frame. They used her steps and landscaping as rigid markers. That analysis locks the suspect squarely between 5'9" and 5'10". Do not call this a casual guess. This data stems from a ruthless, precision measurement workflow. Look at his back. He carries a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, engineered exclusively for the Walmart distribution network. Detectives immediately hunted through Walmart logs, but Sheriff Nanos just shattered that entire theory. We just learned he likely never bought it at a Walmart at all. Walmart controls the design, but anyone can easily flip that pack right on eBay. Detectives face a massive pivot. They pushed into secondary resale markets, expanding the dragnet nationwide. What else did he leave behind? He left a psychological weapon. Look closely at the handgun holstered at his waist, never drawn. He never planned to shoot. He brought it to communicate absolute terror. You strap a gun to your waist and approach an elderly woman at 1:47 in the morning because you need her to realize she holds zero options? He picked that psychological instrument hours before. But what reveals his true identity? His own body betrays him. Retired Agent Jennifer Kidnapper calls his physical markers the absolute top actionable lead. You see his eyebrows creeping over the mask. You easily spot his mustache. That camera caught his exact gait, the unique rhythm of his walk, and his precise physical proportions. Retired Special Agent Jason Pack explicitly told CBS News that detectives need the public studying exactly how this suspect walks. Kidnapper declared that someone knows exactly who hides behind that mask. She calls a public identification the most critical break needed right now. Did he show skin? He exposed his arm. Jim Clemente pushed the analysis further. Watch the exact second he rips that plant out. As his arm snaps forward and the heavy glove slides back, a distinct mark flashes on his right wrist. Clemente broke this massive discovery down directly for Fox News and Newsweek. He believes a tattoo marks that right wrist. If ink exists, investigators will use it to ruthlessly eliminate or confirm suspects. It gives the public a glaring target. He also wears a piece of jewelry. Experts caught the hard outline pressing against the fabric of his glove, likely a pinky ring. He wears it constantly. A ghost who remembered a gun, mask, and double gloves totally forgot to strip off his ring. Someone knows that exact ring. Someone recognizes those specific eyebrows. Who was he talking to? They know the ink branded on his wrist, but another detail proves he wasn't alone. The final nightmare emerges from his pocket. Kidnapper scrutinized the video and told Newsweek she spotted a hard, square shape pushing against his pants, topped by an antenna. She locked in her assessment instantly. He carries a handheld walkie-talkie. She blasted her conclusion online. The man absolutely brought an accomplice, maybe a whole crew. You never pull off this abduction solo. You see the antenna, you spot the radio, and you realize the terrifying truth. They hunted her together. 41 minutes. A ghost exhaled forensic evidence inside a pitch-black house. Former FBI agent and CIA officer Tracy Walder broke down this exact logic on the Brian Anton Investigates podcast. You never use a cell phone for this crime. They triangulate against towers. They generate carrier records within hours. Every call, text, and packet stamps a location. A walkie-talkie communicates at short range, needs no account, leaves zero tower trace, and remains completely untraceable. It is the perfect tool for someone who studied how investigators track suspects. Kidnapper connected one more crucial piece. This explains why geofencing Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood on February 1st yielded 0 leads. If the crew left phones behind, powered them down miles away, and kept completely out of range, investigators get 0 signal and no digital footprint. But that radio guaranteed one terrifying fact. He was not alone. Someone anticipated tracking and made a deliberate choice. That escapes improvisation. That is advanced planning. Before this crime happened, the organizer mapped out strict counter-surveillance measures. They studied the crucial first 48 hours, analyzed how cell data gets pulled, and eliminated that trail. Executing that operational logic demands more than one person. It requires a planning phase, a communication structure, and a coordination mechanism. The walkie-talkie is that mechanism. Where there is a radio, someone is listening. Who was listening? Someone waited outside in position. We might be looking at the driver, caught by a Ring camera 2.5 miles from Nancy's home at 2:36 a.m., 8 minutes after her pacemaker flatlined. He coordinated by radio, waiting for the signal to move. We have 3 points in a network: the porchman, the driver, and the mastermind who supplied the interior map, making it possible. Identifying any one of those 3 people cracks this case wide open. They operated carefully, but he made a critical error at the front door. He arrived prepared, except for one miscalculation. His timeline exposed him. At 1:47 a.m., the doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's front door went dark. By 2:12 a.m., the camera's motion detection registered something nearby. It recorded no video because the doorbell was already removed. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker completed its final sync with her iPhone. Beyond that second, no signal exists. That device went entirely silent. At 2:36 a.m., a Ring camera on a back road 2.5 miles away captured a fleeing vehicle. 41 minutes passed between the doorbell dying and the pacemaker flatlining. 41 minutes inside Nancy Guthrie's home. Clemente discussed this timeline. He occupied that crime scene for approximately 40 minutes. For a targeted kidnapping, that is an eternity. It spiked his risk significantly. Why stay so long? Clemente highlighted a chilling detail about those 41 minutes. The suspect never covered his mouth. He wore a mask, jacket, and gloves, but his mouth remained completely exposed throughout, Clemente said. He exhaled his own DNA for 41 minutes straight. His eyes, eyebrows, eyelashes, and mustache were totally exposed. Any of that could easily detach and drop right into the scene. 41 minutes of breathing inside Nancy Guthrie's home. Every exhaled breath carried shed cells. Stray eyebrow hairs and eyelashes settled onto surfaces. He spent 41 minutes distributing biological material throughout a house where investigators have now secured DNA. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirms this DNA belongs to neither Nancy nor her close contacts. Answering whose it is requires knowing what kept him busy. He was hunting for cameras. What happened during those 41 minutes? The intruder found and neutralized the surveillance. On air, Ashley Banfield confirmed multiple cameras inside the home were smashed. He did not merely disable them, he smashed them. That requires locating each unit and physically striking it to destroy it. You do not do that in a panic mid-crime. That signifies a pre-planned attack targeting devices whose locations you already knew. He removed the recording hardware entirely. Rather than destroying the storage devices, he took them. Leaving shattered components on the floor lets investigators attempt data recovery. Stealing the hardware entirely is much more thorough. It went straight into the backpack. The bag he carried inside was full, but when he walked out, it was heavier. The FBI and PCSD confirmed this in their joint statement. Law enforcement pulled footage from residual back-end data purely because the intruder physically ripped out the hardware, destroying and corrupting local files in the process. We know there was zero forced entry. No broken window frames, no kicked-in doors, no shattered glass. He walked into that house through an entryway he already accessed, knew was unlocked, or that Nancy opened herself. Any of those three scenarios demands one thing: advanced knowledge of how to breach a targeted property without utilizing force. He walked up already knowing his entry points. He knew the camera blind spots. He knew exactly what to steal, and mapped the layout so flawlessly he navigated 41 minutes of darkness without hesitating, without wasting time, without confusion. So how did he get caught? The doorbell camera on the front of the house. The lens that captured him in full. The one the FBI Video Forensic Analysis Unit broke down to the millimeter, proving he never planned for it. The asymmetry is absolute. Inside the home, total meticulous preparation. Outside, at the entrance, completely blind. Pay close attention to that exactness, because random mistakes look messy. A general lack of planning leaves errors everywhere. But this gap is precise. It falls strictly at the front door, and literally nowhere else. Precise gaps stem from precise causes. So let me ask you a highly practical question. How do you find a target you cannot see from any road? Nancy Guthrie's home sits in the Catalina foothills, an elevated, sprawling residential enclave north of Tucson. Her specific street does not link up to any main traffic artery, making the address invisible from passing vehicles. You absolutely cannot stake out that property from a car parked on a neighboring block. You cannot spot the house, identify the driveway, or guess the right turn unless you stood there yourself or someone gave you the coordinates. To show up at Nancy Guthrie's front door at 1:47 in the morning and walk to the entrance, you had to know that structure existed and exactly where it sat. So, how did he track it down? Now, push harder. How did he map the interior camera grid? Ring and Nest do not publish where subscribers mount their devices. You will not find that data in any publicly accessible database. It does not exist in property tax records. It never shows up in court filings, insurance paperwork, or anything you can search online. The exact positioning of security cameras inside a specific private residence exists in only two possible places: in the memory of whoever configured the system, or through the direct observation of someone who spent enough time inside to study it. He did not wire that house. He does not live there, meaning he stood inside those walls before, or someone who did briefed him. Now ask the absolute hardest question. How did he know she would be isolated at 1:47 in the morning on that exact date? Nancy Guthrie does not publish her daily routine. She lived a deeply private life. Her daughters are public figures, but Nancy kept to herself. No public calendar tracked her movements. She had no social media accounts broadcasting her schedule. She had no predictable loop you could scrape from public data alone. To predict that on the night of January 31st, blending into February 1st, Nancy would pull back in from her daughter's place through the garage, secure the house alone, and stay isolated through the early hours of the morning, that demands intimate access to her private life. Recent, highly accurate access. The functional access only granted to someone operating regularly in her inner circle. Then we hit the medication timeline. Puma County Sheriff Chris Nanos stated publicly that Nancy relied on daily medication, and missing it turned life-threatening inside of 24 hours. Knowing she harbored a medical dependency tied to a strictly urgent countdown is clinical intelligence. It lives in her medical files. It is known only to her healthcare providers or the tight circle managing her daily care routines. Whoever orchestrated this operation understood Nancy's medical fragility, handed them leverage. They knew family and law enforcement would feel crushing, time-sensitive panic once she vanished. They factored that exact detail into the math. Add up the total inventory of what he had to know. A house address invisible from the road. An entry point breached without force. The entire interior surveillance system. The exact placement of every single unit. The hidden location of the recording hardware. Not just the cameras, but the physical devices storing the footage. The reality that she lived alone. The schedule dictating exactly which night and what exact hours she would be home and unaccompanied. The medical vulnerability. A floor plan memorized so deeply he owned 41 minutes of total darkness without making a single wrong turn. Look closely at that list. Every single piece of it is non-public information. The attacker knew exactly which nights Nancy Guthrie slept alone, demanding either direct personal access to her residence or a highly accurate informant. An unknown associate compiled her vulnerabilities into a master dossier, yet this detailed tactical map completely missed the single lens watching the porch. The internet keeps debating this particular surveillance tape without grasping the actual reality hidden inside those digital frames. That video proves the intruder fully grasped the internal alarm layout while remaining completely blind to the exterior hardware. Combine those two realities and you get an absolute certainty rather than just another internet guess. Whoever fed the suspect his tactical blueprint either overlooked the porch lens entirely or gathered intelligence months before anyone installed that specific technology. Criminal profiler Jim Clemente broke down exactly how this oversight happened. Caught off guard by the lens, the attacker stood empty-handed without any breaching equipment to pry open the main entrance. Breaching the primary entryway never factored into his strategy. He intended to infiltrate the residence from a completely different angle. That entire sequence of hiding his hand behind the shrubbery exposed a man panicking over a device he never anticipated facing. The porch simply did not exist on his tactical blueprint, leaving us with one inescapable question. Who drew the map? The informant drafted that map by gathering a massive amount of residential intelligence without actually residing there or sharing any blood ties. They lacked any tight social bonds whatsoever. This individual held zero personal connection to the property and possessed no logical reason to memorize architectural specifics. Yet, they mapped out the exact camera locations for a strike. They pinpointed the digital storage drives and identified the single vulnerability where a crowbar became completely unnecessary. They understood her isolated living situation and tracked her weekly schedule, demanding a level of routine physical access inside the structure itself. This required recent and highly functional visits. They accessed those details openly because their presence never looked like espionage. It simply looked like ordinary employment. Clemente brought up a specific profiling term to identify this exact type of informant: transitory contact. Behavioral analysts use this phrase to define surface-level interactions that somehow generate massive amounts of actionable intelligence. Picture the water maintenance guy arriving bi-weekly. Think of the landscaping team clocking in monthly, the plumber fixing leaks, or the medical assistant managing daily prescriptions. Consider the parcel courier running a daily neighborhood route. These workers physically occupy the space, often crossing the threshold, while maintaining zero authentic personal connection to the actual resident. Their eyes catch details entirely by accident, since standing inside a room forces a person to notice their immediate surroundings. They watch the interior illumination shift during the evening. They figure out if relatives visit frequently or if the occupant remains isolated, noting the lens beside the door frame and the digital hub down the corridor. They overhear mundane conversations regarding doctor visits, pharmacy runs, and the predictable logistics of an ordinary week. After logging months, or sometimes even years of consistent labor, these temporary visitors accidentally construct an exact operational blueprint of a stranger's daily existence. Nobody writes anything down. The data just piles up inside their head steadily and completely under the radar, leading us to an unavoidable truth. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. The massive residence she maintained deep within the Catalina foothills demanded constant professional upkeep. The harsh Arizona desert absolutely destroys unkempt properties, forcing constant landscaping and water management. Brutal summer temperatures make climate control technicians mandatory, while advancing age requires pharmacy couriers and rotating medical transport services. A senior citizen living completely solo simply cannot maintain an estate that size without heavy logistical assistance. Every single contractor who arrived brought a fresh set of eyes onto a private sanctuary the owner assumed remained unobserved. Dozens of strangers studied her life over time, until one specific worker decided to weaponize that passive knowledge. Retired investigator Tom McDanough addressed this exact operational dynamic publicly. He stated the kidnapper definitely crossed paths with Nancy previously, pointing directly toward a landscaper or package courier. Former New York Police Department Detective James Stanton summarized the threat using 4 unforgettable words: someone tangential to this woman's life. Tangential means hovering outside her inner circle, completely missing from the initial suspect list when detectives asked about Nancy's actual friends. Tangential means operating right on the boundaries of her routine, close enough to gather intelligence but distant enough to dodge the primary dragnet. That perfectly defines the unseen informant who handed over the internal alarm schematics. The intruder held a perfect mental map of the recording hardware and entry points. Yet, he missed one glaring detail. His informant used another door. Consider the pool technician using the back gate, the yard crew outside, or the HVAC contractor entering the garage, the caregiver arriving through a specific door Nancy Guthrie intentionally left unlocked. Everyone maps their specific work zones, leaving the rest blank. Who merged those fragments? Someone inside did. Converting isolated details into a briefing requires intent. Someone asked questions, or someone volunteered. Under the first scenario, an FBI agent confirmed on the record, an individual possessing resources and intent to abduct Nancy Guthrie identified someone with household access. They approached that worker, buying specific intelligence. They bought the security layout, entry points, and her schedule. They pitched a cover story, calling it a security audit, an insurance assessment, or a routine background check. They built a lie legitimate enough for the informant to rationalize sharing details. Scenario 2 changes the dynamic. The transfer happened organically. A worker absorbing property details over months discovered a direct link to a criminal network. Financial desperation, or a personal relationship, drove them to the mastermind. They handed over the intelligence directly or indirectly. Both paths reached the exact same destination. An insider built the briefing. Yet, both share one glaring omission. Why ignore the front door? I have the answer. Here's something directly. Forget podcast speculation from a retired detective. Forget commentators piecing together wild theories. Former FBI Special Agent Greg Rogers explains it. Rogers spent over 2 decades at the Bureau investigating complex criminal enterprises and national security. Speaking exclusively on the record to Parade magazine, Rogers stated, "I think it is highly likely that someone who knew Guthrie and/or had something to do with her, home maintenance, health care, yard and pool care, was involved. One of those persons could have been hired to give info about security systems, Guthrie's schedule, and so on. That person could have also worked in one of those positions to be able to learn that same information. Analyze that carefully. Home maintenance, health care, yard and pool care. Rogers targets specific functional roles, avoiding vague categories. These exact roles demand transitory contact. They generate the precise, reliable intelligence about a private residence our suspect possessed. Rogers emphasizes this remains highly likely. He uses exact words, avoiding cautious hedging. He considers it highly likely an individual from those categories participated. What happened next? Someone hired them. He completely avoids speculation. He states, someone hired one of those persons to supply intelligence regarding security systems and Nancy Guthrie's schedule. Hiring implies a deliberate transaction. The mastermind required a map of this woman's life. According to a former FBI special agent speaking on the record, they bought it. Rogers offers a passive version. The person involved could have also worked in one of those positions to be able to learn that same information. This removes the transactional element. An individual accumulated visual data and surrendered it through another mechanism. Perhaps a relationship, deception, or coerced disclosure. The transfer method leaves the outcome unchanged. Intelligence breached Nancy Guthrie's domestic world and hit the streets. The buyer arrived at her property knowing absolutely everything, except they faced one problem, the front door. Investigators pursued 2 highly supported explanations for that gap. They remain completely compatible. Theory 1. The doorbell camera was new. Security systems never remain static. People constantly upgrade cameras. This happens frequently within the older homeowner demographic. Adult children push video doorbells for safety. Families prioritize this exact conversation regarding aging parents living alone. They add a front door camera to monitor the house and record exactly who enters. If someone significantly upgraded Nancy's doorbell camera after the informant's final period of active access, the timeline fractures. The informant provided an accurate picture of the interior system, leaving a total blind spot at the front door. The suspect arrived holding an accurate map of the old configuration. The doorbell belonged to the new one. He missed its existence until standing directly in front of the lens. He grabbed a bush. Theory 2 changes the angle. The informant never used the front entrance. Think carefully about this. Which regular service workers at a residential property entirely avoid the front entrance? Pool technicians only access through side or rear gates. A killer left DNA everywhere, but his fatal flaw was the front door. Landscapers just work the perimeter. They head straight for pool equipment, bypassing the main entry completely. Repair contractors enter through the garage. Health aides handling specific tasks might clear through a side door. In any scenario, a worker absorbs an accurate, detailed mental layout of specific interior areas, the rooms they operate in, the hallways they navigate, and the equipment they service, without ever standing on the porch long enough to trigger a doorbell camera. Their knowledge was dangerously real. Their access was legitimate, but it hit a hard boundary. That boundary is the front door. Their mental map featured pristine detail for accessed areas, but remained blank at the front elevation. The suspect arrived holding that map. He grabbed a bush. Now, dial back to the walkie-talkie. That antenna in his pocket does something more critical than identifying a communication device. It blows the scope of this entire operation wide open. If he carried a walkie-talkie and Kidnapper read that footage accurately, someone sat on the receiving end. Probably outside, not inside the house. Possibly idling in the vehicle, a Ring camera recorded on a back road, 2.5 miles away, at 2:36 a.m., exactly 8 minutes after Nancy's pacemaker flatlined. That establishes 3 operational points: the operator on the porch, the getaway driver, and the architect, providing the pre-mission briefing. Kidnapper stated it directly. You never commit this abduction alone. Tracy Walder echoed that assessment. Getaway vehicles require coordination. You cannot execute a 41-minute infiltration while moving a vehicle 2.5 miles away without real-time communication. Radios are exactly how they coordinated. Choosing walkie-talkies over cell phones is a deliberate tactical move. It perfectly explains why geofencing neighborhood cell data that night reportedly produced 0 usable leads. These operators actively studied counter-surveillance. They made calculated choices to avoid leaving cell records. They planned an entry bypassing the front door. They physically extracted hardware instead of merely disabling it. This was a careful, resourced operation. Even tight plans crack. The doorbell camera is where their intelligence failed, entirely independent of the suspect's actions. It unraveled because the informant providing his tactical map possessed a massive blind spot. That gap lands squarely on the front door. Today, that singular mistake is the strongest investigative lead, identifying the informant. Here is the crucial takeaway. Every polished element caught on camera, including the weapon, the full pack, the flawless navigation of the interior, the zero-force entry point, and the direct route to cameras, proves someone fed him exhaustive intel. He knew the layout cold. Someone briefed him, and he executed a perfect map. The only flaw? The reaching hand, the grabbed bush, the visible hesitation of an operator reacting to unknown variables exposes missing information. The front door, the doorbell, the solitary exterior detail, the informant never accessed or never knew existed. His blind spot maps the informant's exact knowledge gap. The insider shared what he knew. What he didn't know, he couldn't share. This doorbell footage captures more than the tragic events hitting Nancy Guthrie on February 1st. It projects a negative image of the architect arming her abductor, a silhouette of the informant's knowledge, defined precisely by one missing detail. Investigators are actively turning that silhouette into a person. How do you catch a ghost? You track the DNA he shed, breathing freely for 41 minutes inside Nancy's home. Eyebrow hairs and eyelashes dropped onto her surfaces now sit in the investigative genetic genealogy pipeline. This completely bypasses your standard criminal database search. IGG operates even when a suspect's DNA lacks a prior law enforcement match. It sweeps consumer genealogy platforms, specifically targeting databases like GED Match and Family Tree DNA. It constructs a family tree around the DSA profile, pinpoints living relatives, and systematically narrows that tree to a specific individual. This methodology unmasked the Golden State Killer after 40 years. If Nancy's forensic samples hold enough data, his anonymity vanishes forever. Jennifer Kidnapper stated she thinks it could really break the case. Authorities are tracing that mystery vehicle from 2:36 a.m. Every passing car is cross-referenced against neighborhood access patterns, state registrations, and connections within Nancy's service orbit. Do not forget the Ozark Trail backpack. Investigators are aggressively tracking that Walmart-exclusive design through corporate retail records and secondary online market platforms. Investigators tracked a very specific purchase made right before February 1st. Footage captured key physical traits. Distinct eyebrows above a mask, a mustache, a right wrist underbelly tattoo, and a potential pinky ring now serve as the baseline against thousands of incoming tips. Kidnapper delivered a blunt assessment. She stands firm that multiple individuals already recognize this suspect. Someone knows those eyebrows. Someone saw that tattoo. Someone recognizes the guy with that ring and backpack who vanished from his routine around February 1st. Will he disappear entirely? The Tucson FBI Embedded Task Force refuses to work a cold file. No. They actively chase leads, surviving their rigorous filter. They demand hard substance directly linking back to actual people and real decisions. 4 detectives, 1 sergeant, and the entire Phoenix FBI Field Office Analytical Brain Trust now target one exact profile. They seek a specific access level and hunt the exact knowledge gap, revealing the original leak. Yet, Nancy Guthrie remains missing. For over a month, her daughters continually visit that house, leaving yellow roses alongside handwritten notes. Savannah abandoned the Milan Winter Olympics just to be in Tucson. Cameras captured Annie near the memorial beside a personal note written straight to her mother. Have police hit a wall? Absolutely not. The operation mutated from a massive dragnet into a highly surgical strike. The Tucson FBI embedded task force strictly targets the tips, bleeding through their filter. They want concrete substance. They need threads tracing backward to real players making real choices. Look deep inside the domestic orbit of Nancy Guthrie. Someone visited her property for maintenance. Someone cared for it. Someone managed the daily logistics, helping an 84-year-old live independently. And now they carry a crushing secret. Were they paid? Perhaps someone tricked them into handing over details under legitimate pretenses. Or maybe they volunteered intel and spent 5 weeks obsessively watching the news. They sit wondering how deep this goes and if the heat reaches them. They panic over whether pipeline DNA will spit out a name, leading right back to their doorstep. Who breaks first? Greg Rogers notes that resolution usually hits when one conspirator desperately wants out of the nightmare. The turning point arrives when their guilty conscience outweighs whatever initially bought their silence. They stare at Savannah Guthrie on Instagram begging for a miracle, and they suddenly run a different moral calculation than they did late on January 31st. The family reward is $1 million. The FBI offers $100,000. Tips stay completely anonymous. You can collect that massive payout in pure cash. If you hold the missing piece, if those eyebrows, that backpack, or that wrist tattoo trigger recognition, or if anyone in the service orbit of Nancy Guthrie acted strange near the 1st of February, call. The tip line rests below. Video 5 dissects the ransom note chain. We reveal what the FBI actually knows about the chilling messages sent right after Nancy vanished. Those communications expose the exact psychology of the mastermind behind this plot. Nancy Guthrie deserves to be found.